What is poppin', fight fans, and welcome to another episode of the Mystic Hour. And I am joined by a man who needs no introduction, 5'9", Boston, Massachusetts, the color commentator for the UFC, Mr. Jon Anik. Welcome back to the show, John.
Darnell, it's great to be with you as always. And I don't know how much of your viewership actually gets to see all the bells and whistles beforehand, the Mystic Hour loading, but the music and everything else. I'm fired up to be here. If that show open doesn't get you fired up to be here, I don't know what to say about your previous and future guests.
Hey, I appreciate that big time. I had to step it up. I remember we did this interview 2 years ago. I was in Florida down there, and I didn't have anything that I have now, but I had to step it up just to, get to the level that you're on, because you're a legend, John, and I appreciate you for coming on, of course.
Well, hey, the aesthetic is a big deal, and we've over 8 years tried to steadily improve it on the Anik and Florian podcast. You see, right now, I am in the middle of a major transformation. You well know, because you're a loyal listener to the Anik and Florian podcast, that I've been broadcasting live from my twin brother's house, right? I had AT&T here yesterday. It's all systems go. I have a beautiful piece of artwork ready to go. We're remaking the entire home studio. But hopefully it sounds crystal to you and your listenership today, my man.
It sounds beautiful. And let's go, Anik and Florian podcast. Yes, I watch that every single week. But, John, I'm not in Florida anymore. I'm out here in California. How's it going down there?
It's good. I don't spend a ton of time here, right? Obviously, as you well know, I'm away about 100 nights a year, and that's just the nature of the beast and the devil that I know. But it's great right now. Like, there's different types of heat and humidity. As you well know, I lived in Las Vegas for 4 years, dealt with the hair dryer in your face, 120 degrees. Doesn't get triple digits in Florida, but you break a sweat going to get the mail. So it's almost picking your poison. Everybody has a preference. Your body does acclimate. I like the humidity and the heat, just like those Brazilians do. And, I don't know if we'll be here forever. I still think there's always going to be that northeastern tug, but this is home for now. And I will say, if you have to be on the road a lot, as I do, it could be worse coming back to South Florida. It's always a nice place in which to land back to after a long trip.
Yeah, and I know I don't miss the humidity. That's for sure. I love this California weather. I'm not gonna lie, but I know sometimes you've spoken about maybe South Carolina moving to near the BFF, Kenny Florian. Is that something that's a reality?
Yeah, I think the Carolinas are just outstanding, and they check a lot of boxes. Kenny's in Charlotte, North Carolina. Of course, Carolina Chris Weidman is in South Carolina right now. So, yeah, that's more palatable to me than I think going back to the Northeast, which would be my wife's desire. I did 31 years in the snow and cold. I'm not jonesing to get back to that noise. But the Charlotte thing's interesting, because if we were ever to take the Anik and Florian podcast 5 days a week and potentially have it be a morning show offering that was live, we'd probably have to be together. As sick as Ken Flo might get of me, that would probably have to be a prerequisite. So I don't know. I would say probably 25% chance we end up in Charlotte, 50% chance we end up back in New England.
I love it. Love to hear it. I love to hear it. But, John, it's been 11 years now you've been with the UFC, since 2012, I believe. What's the biggest difference you feel from when you first started to now that is something that you love even more than you did back in the day?
Well, I do have to say, as an American, that our domestic footprint is just a lot different than it was in 2011 when I signed on the dotted line, and it looked like our television home might be G4 at the time. I remember having real conversations with my family in 2011 during that summer when I was making the decision to leave the UFC or leave ESPN and go to the UFC. And a lot of people were saying, hey, man, it took you forever to get to ESPN. The UFC might not even be on a network. They might be on the internet. They might be on G4. And to me, it did not matter. I wanted to hitch myself to that wagon. But COVID-19, that global pandemic, for all of the issues and problems and fatalities and illnesses, and I lost relatives as almost everybody else did, right? But Dana White and the UFC capitalized on that pandemic to such an extent, right? Being live, being the only show in town, being weekly for a time. I'll never forget those 3 shows we did back to back to back in May of 2020 in Jacksonville that seemingly opened up the world of sport for everybody that was locked down in their homes. And I can't sit here, Darnell, and give you the numbers to properly quantify how much that helped us grow domestically. But it's all been building to that, right? The Fox deal paved the way for the ESPN deal. But then a year into the ESPN Plus deal, you have a global pandemic, everybody's at home. And now I think our American footprint has never been better. So that's a major takeaway for me. And then just all the stars that that we've developed. And I shouldn't say we, I should say they, but all the stars and all the talent that has been developed, right? It's crazy to think guys like Israel Adesanya in 2017 were not at the Ultimate Fighting Championship. So it's been a hell of a run. And I'm curious what the next 10 years hold, you know, for the combat sports leader with or without me.
Yes, Israel Adesanya, as you can see, I have that man on my wall. It's an incredible legend of this sport. But speaking of the pandemic, what's something that maybe you're glad you don't have to deal with anymore while you're with the UFC or in your life?
Well, the COVID testing and everything that came with calling fights in that COVID-19 climate. Now, fortunately for me, they don't call my number at the UFC Apex a whole lot, but I do believe that fans are the lifeblood of this sport, and mixed martial arts is the greatest live event in town. But I do think it needs fans, and it needs noise, and it needs all the pageantry that comes with ideally a capacity crowd. So I think that's a little bit less than ideal. Fight Island is something that we will all look back upon fondly. It's just an absolutely objectively crazy time in all of our lives. But there were a lot of inconvenient truths that came with that in terms of being quarantined, and some limitations in terms of maybe fighter access or actually doing the job. So it really is crazy to think back upon that time in our lives, bro. And thankfully we're out the other side right now. And I do hope we get back to a world where, you know, at least 35 of our 42 live events are in front of a live audience and a capacity crowd, because I don't have to tell you, there's people all over the United States and beyond that that want so badly to see one of our live events, you know, before their lives are all said and done.
Absolutely. And as you said, they don't usually call you for the UFC Apex events. Does that give you enough time, you feel, to spend with your family and like maybe not needing as like a huge long break, because you're somebody that's always on a UFC pay-per-view broadcast, usually on a broadcast when they travel from state to state? Does that kind of help you not needing maybe a month off just to spend with your family?
You know, I don't think I've struck that work-life balance, if I am to answer that question honestly. Yeah. And even when you look at a week like this, you know, you and I are talking on the back end of Jacksonville. Next week is the single busiest week of my year, right? International Fight Week, Hall of Fame, multiple appearances. We're doing a live episode of the Anik and Florin podcast, hosting UFC Live for ESPN, myriad media opportunities and other projects and things that are going on during that week. So a lot of that work is happening this week. Like, I will be at the Palm Beach County Public Library this Friday in a study room by myself, just trying to get ahead of the prep. We will voice the UFC 290 in arena stuff tomorrow. So it looks like an idle week and a bye week to the masses, but, you know, we're still cranking out the Anik and Florin podcast, you know, still talking to fine individuals like yourself and still spinning it forward to next week and the Hall of Fame and everything else. So, there's not as much downtime as people maybe would expect, you know, around the 25 live events that I work. But I don't know that a lot of people who really love their job would have it any other way. You know, I think there's going to come a time where maybe I'm closer to that work-life balance, but I have not struck that, at least right now. I try to be as doting and present a father as humanly possible when I am home. And that's always at the forefront of my mind.
Yeah, and how special was it to have your son there with you in Jacksonville? Just seeing that moment, seeing the pictures. Of course, we didn't see every single moment from that, but how important was that moment for you?
It was amazing. And I have to thank the UFC and Amber Bowen and everybody else. It really was the perfect storm, D, right? For a matinee show, first fight at 11:30 a.m. in Jacksonville. You know, the VIP wasn't crawling with Tom Brady types, so my family was able to actually sit on the floor. There was a VIP room in the back, which arena to arena can be different, but this one had like an ice cream bar and arcade games, and that kind of allowed them to stay for the whole show. So they came back out for the co-main event. What I found particularly interesting, and it was probably the most heartwarming, memorable night of my professional life to have my kids there. But, dude, they left after round 3 of Josh Emmett and Ilia Topuria. So they left right before that 10-7 round. And my kids are conditioned to the blood. They don't seem overly fazed by it. But I don't know that any 5-year-old boy at his first UFC live event needs to see a 10-7 round that might happen once annually in the UFC. So I was thankful, actually, in retrospect, that I saw them walking out after round 3 and they didn't have to watch that round 4. But it was a special night, and thank you for asking about it.
Absolutely. And speaking of family, I got to talk about my man, Jon Anik. You have him on the road now. How long have you had him on the road with you?
Couple years now, and it just depends show to show, right? Like he's come to 3 UFC fight weeks this year in which he hasn't even stuck around for the live event, right? Which might sound crazy to some people, right? He's there to help me during the week. And, you know, my life has just gotten a little bit more complicated and chaotic and busier over the last several years. So he's been helping me during fight week. But like for UFC 285, when John Jones fought Cito Gane, he flew back before the show. You know, this show in Jacksonville, he flew home on Saturday morning. So he's not always sticking around to sort of reap the rewards. So you got to love him. But yeah, it's been a huge support system for me. And, you know, I just have a lot of time in my hotel room where I'm working in silence. And it just helps to have somebody to bounce stuff off of, especially somebody who knows the content. So it's been a more fun last couple of years, to be sure.
Yeah, and he does remember the show with my man Bilal Muhammad, which is one of my favorite shows to watch during the week. What do you think Bilal Muhammad has to do just to get this title shot? He just is on a long winning streak. People are denying him. What else does that man need to do to get this title shot, in your opinion?
He has to wait. He has to be willing to wait. And this is a conversation that I would be more than willing to have with him, right?
Yeah.
You had to beat Gilbert Burns under less than ideal circumstances. You had to take that fight because maybe you felt like the promotion was not going to afford you that big fight opportunity. You took that fight, ended up being on one wheel. You win that co-main event. You got to idle. You have to be willing to wait. Maybe there's a backup situation for Bilal where you can still grease him a little bit and he can still get paid. But I think patience is going to be the virtue. And I think the inconvenient truth for Bilal is that the wait could be longer than you and I initially forecast. Even if you and I in an ambitious world can say that Leon Edwards and Colby Covington are going to fight 3 or 4 months from now in October, what if Colby Covington wins that fight and they got to run it back? Then your Bilal may be looking at 18 months on the sidelines. But he earned a championship opportunity. Those are very hard to come by. I don't have to tell Darnell Giovanni that. So for me, I think Bilal just has to be willing to wait. And that's a hard conversation, right? Because he's in his fighting prime. He's had to wait at times already. So I don't know his relative willingness to wait up to 12 months, up to 18 months. But that would be my advice. Just wait.
Yeah, and some commentators get some, you know, backlash from fans for favoritism or different things. Sometimes Paul Felder makes comments that people get upset because they feel like he's showing favoritism. You are openly about like being friends with fighters, taking pictures with fighters, saying how much you love these kinds of fighters. How hard is it for you to separate that when you're actually on the broadcast?
Well, those friendships are omnipresent throughout the entire roster, right? I mean, there are varying degrees of friendship, but you're probably talking about 300 or 400 acquaintance / friend types that I have in the UFC. Now, I posted my story about Jillian Robertson during fight week last week, watching film, right? And then a few days later, I post a picture of me and Tabitha Ricci. So in that particular fight, maybe I'm hitting it on both sides. You know, I did some Bruno Silva content in my Instagram story during the week. Brendan Allen is a dear friend of mine. Bruno Silva and I have a conversation after the loss, and I try to build him back up. So my focus is not just humanizing these athletes on the broadcast, but getting to know them so that I can do an optimal job when it comes to humanizing them. And I'm not really too worried about what one individual fan or naysayer might say about one individual utterance of mine. Now, I might say on the Anik and Florian podcast, Charles Oliveira might be my favorite fighter, and Islam Makhachev's fan base might run with that, you know? But if you were to have Islam Makhachev on the Mystic Hour and ask him about Jon Anik and his dealings with Jon Anik, I think it would be very favorable in terms of what his response would be. Like, I have gone out of my way to support dozens, hundreds of fighters over the years. I take it very seriously. It is, it's my life's work. I did sort of close with a kicker on the Anik and Florian podcast this week, address this because I think some Makhachev fans maybe took issue with things that I've said, but I've supported all these athletes and I think my track record speaks for itself. And that's why, you know, I'm anti-Khabib, but there he is over my shoulder, you know? So I think if you ask Khabib, he would feel like my support of him has been overwhelming over the years, you know? So I sleep pretty well at night, but I could go the other way, D, right? I could just not publicly support any of the athletes, and I'm not willing to do that.
Yeah, and that's something I used to struggle with too. Just like, oh, I can't support this person. I can't support this person. But you know what? I love this sport. I am a fan, number one, and I feel that's okay for anybody to feel a certain way about people that they love and something that they embrace, you know. And speaking of GOATs, just talking about Habib there, Amanda Nunes recently retired. I heard you talk about her on your podcast. I heard you talk about her with MMA fighting as well. But what is something that you're going to miss the most about getting to cover an Amanda Nunes fight?
Well,
Fight every week.
it's a nice transition by you, right? Because I felt so embedded with Amanda Nunes that some might say, hey, what about Irene Aldana? But again, have Irene Aldana on the Mystic Hour and ask her if she has felt that support. And the answer is an unequivocal yes. So I will miss the fighter meetings with Amanda Nunes. I will miss her omnipresent smile, just her graciousness with us every step of the way. Just the fact that she was always so consistent and even keeled in terms of her disposition, training camp in and training camp out. All of these championship training camps, right? I think closing her UFC career with 12 successive UFC title fights and always showing up to every fighter meeting and giving us all of that good energy, even if it was a suboptimal weight cut down to 135 pounds. But I guess my biggest in-octagon takeaway is just overwhelmingly her fight IQ, bro. Like, it's one thing to have a game plan and a strategy. It's another thing to be able to stick to it and to execute it, right? Even hearkening back to the Felicia Spencer fight in which she beat her pillar to post, 5-10-8s. If you really want to go back and watch it, it could have been 50-40, at least 50-42. And yet some people say, hey, why didn't you put her away? Well, because I'm waiting to force a singular mistake if I'm Amanda Nunes. And Felicia didn't make that obvious mistake to create for the opening that would allow me to put her away. So you know what I'll do? I'll beat her pillar to post. Maybe the best fight IQ of all time. And even just in terms of the execution against Irene Aldana and what most of us believe will be her swan song. I hope she goes out on that note. Tremendous fighter, greatest of all time. And her Hall of Fame induction ceremony is going to be something.
Oh, yeah. And that's somebody I'm going to miss watch fighting for sure in that division with Amanda Nunes. But, John, I wanted to get your opinion on something which has been a little bit controversial. I know you talked about a little bit on your podcast, but it's been bugging me all week. A lot of people have been talking about it via Twitter. So there was a little recent drama in PFL about matchmaking two teammates together, which, you know, I guess PFL has in their second round of their competition, they'll give certain fighters that they push a little bit of an easier fight, but does not to say that they're always going to win that fight. You know, we had Anthony Pettis when he the first season, he didn't even make the playoffs. Second time around, he made the playoffs, but he still didn't end up winning that championship. But let's say you and Jason are in the same weight class, right? And PFL happens to match you guys together. Would you just be like, you know what? Not Jason, maybe that's your brother. Kenny Florian, let's go. Your best friend, and they put you guys in the same fight. What are you doing in that position? Are you just gonna forfeit? I'm not gonna do this, or are you just gonna go talk to Kenny? Let's do this. It's for a large amount of money, and just end up fighting.
It's a great question, and I wasn't wholly aware of this entire PFL controversy when we did our show earlier this week because I had come back from Jacksonville and was leaning more into the results than I was this particular controversy. You know, it's a really difficult thing, but in the nature of competition, you either go in there and you go balls to the wall looking to finish, or I think you take yourself out of that situation. And I do believe that despite some of the challenges that their format presents, that there was absolutely a way to work around this. We've come into a lot of different situations like this. And I think there are varying degrees of friendships, right? Like we had a fight in the UFC recently between Esteban Ribovitz and Loic Rajabov. And one guy's like, we're friends, and the other dude's like, we're not, you know? So there's varying degrees of where this can fall on the spectrum. But there's always a learning lesson, right? Like even when it comes to me and certain things maybe that I say on my podcast that might upset a fighter or a coach or even a fan, like there's always a learning lesson. And I think that there's one here, but in the limited knowledge I have about it, I feel like they should have gotten in front of this.
Yeah, it was, I don't know. I just feel like if a lot of money on the line, I called my brother after this, and he's just like, I would kick your ass in a heartbeat if they were to put that with no problem and give you a hug and a kiss after, because competition is competition.
Yeah, and I would fight my brother and I would fight Kenny. I actually have been hospitalized with 3 concussions in my life, and that's the only reason why you probably haven't seen me in some silly amateur combat sports setting against somebody like my brother. But yeah, a lot more upside for me fighting Kenny Florian, who would be like a minus 2,000 betting favorite against me. Like if I landed a singular strike on Ken Flo, they'd be talking about that on Monday morning.
So I guess we're not going to. I remember you were talking about training and maybe doing a little amateur fight. Is that off the books now?
We actually had a conversation about it this past weekend with Dominic Cruz. He was in my hotel room alongside my brother, and we talked about like a grappling match. So I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that I would grapple my twin brother in some wimpy white belt scenario. But yeah, I can't take a strike to the head. Like I got no button. I got no chin. So we'd have to get creative. But yeah, I'll grapple him. He can put his hair in a bun and we'll fucking go at it.
That's what I'm talking about. Speaking of PFL, we had Jon Jones, Francis Ngannou, have that little face-off. Do you think that Dana White will just give in at some point? Because there's just so much, I want to say, money to be made, so much history to be made. ESPN, same UFC and the PFL are on the same network. Like why not have that fight? Or do you think that's something that just will never happen because maybe Dana will never give in to like letting somebody walk away and then giving them an opportunity to make a lot of money when they could have done it when they were within his promotion?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, never say never. I certainly would never utter those words in mixed martial arts, and time does heal all wounds. But I feel like this PFL contract is going to have to evaporate for a little bit and expire for a little bit if that is actually something that could materialize. Like Francis Ngannou, at the very least, is going to have to fight once in the PFL under that contract. And I'm not necessarily suggesting that Ngannou would have to go back to the UFC tail between his legs, but I don't see him fighting Jon Jones under a contract that isn't a UFC heavyweight contract. And I also can't sit here and tell you just how big a cash windfall that fight is relative to a fight between Jon Jones and Stipe Miocic, for example. I don't have the internal metrics. I don't have those answers to you. So fundamentally, I don't know how big a cash fall this is for the UFC relative to other heavyweight fights involving Jon Jones. Yeah, the expectation is that it would be enormous. Maybe not as big as Elon Musk versus Mark Zuckerberg. But yeah, I just don't know. I want to see it badly. I mean, there have been a lot of fights, those strike while the iron's hot type fights, Anderson Silva versus George St. Pierre, that if you don't strike, it's not going to happen. I'm just hopeful that we get a Jon Jones singular heavyweight title defense at this point in time, which is no guarantee before the end of the year, right? So I think first order business for me and our UFC staff, let's get Johnny Bones back in there to defend his heavyweight title.
Johnny, you're so Johnny. Any single time I see him, that's the first thing that comes to my mind.
Of course.
I love that song. But John, do you ever see yourself maybe if there's an opportunity, like for instance, Megan O'Leary, she goes to the NFL, she does amazing work there. If you ever get that phone call, NBA, Boston Celtics game, Patriots, any one of those different kinds of sports, is that something you ever look forward to doing maybe in your future?
So my contract's a little bit different. I really can't do that stuff. I did call a college football game back in 2015, but it was sort of a one-time only deal. And I was told to sort of not get any ideas. Perhaps if I got a high-profile NFL opportunity on short notice and it was similar, like a one-game situation, maybe the UFC would allow for that to happen. But at least right now, I'm exclusive. I think there will always be that NFL pull, and that'll always be part of a dream scenario for me. But I have my dream job. I have the one that I want, and I'm just not sure that that's ever going to materialize. I mean, football is much more in my wheelhouse than mixed martial arts. I mean, I'm not a lifelong martial artist. Certainly I would defend my MMA acumen at this stage of things, having covered MMA regularly since 2007. I've got almost 20 years in the game at this point in time, but I didn't grow up, a combat sports fan per se. And I've been watching the NFL religiously since I was about 4 or 5 years old. So it comes naturally to me. I hope I get that short notice call, and maybe the UFC has a decision to make. But at least right now, I'm happy where I am, and I'm thankful that the UFC continues to entrust me with its biggest fights and biggest moments.
Oh, the things I do to hear you on a Patriots podcast, not podcast, broadcast, my Lord.
Thank you.
It would be a moment.
It
would be a moment. But we're 11 years in, John. What do you want to accomplish within the next 10 years? Do you have any goals, specific things you'd like to happen within the next 10 years?
So interesting, because I spent a lot of time with Dominic Cruz on the road, and we were prepping together in advance of the Jacksonville show. And I asked him if he sets goals, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, I guess sort of I would have this loose goal to be able to show up for 100 consecutive pay-per-views, right? But
Yeah.
part of that is just rooted in availability, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes I don't talk about this because I don't want to jinx myself. But since the UFC first called my number, January 20th of 2012, I've never had to turn down a show or miss a show due to illness. You know, maybe I'm a year or so away from doing 100 consecutive pay-per-views since they entrusted me with that at the end of 2016, right? But it's something I take very seriously. And even during that global pandemic, when I was having false positives in Abu Dhabi, I was still able to make the walk, so to speak. So I guess for me, I would have that goal to try to do 100 consecutive pay-per-views, and to hold down that seat for 100 straight is something that I have thought about. But I also think I have personal goals that involve, you know, just being around more when my daughter is in high school at the end of this contract. And that flies in the face of maybe doing this job forever. So I don't know how long I am for the internationals. You know, I have goals when it comes to fatherhood as well. But I do hope to get to that 100. And yeah, I mean, I do think that that just being on the NFL's radar at some point is a goal as well. But I'm very happy. I'm contented. We always want to grow the podcast. You know, that will always be a goal. But, you know, I feel like I just keep my head down and focus less on the future and more on the present.
Yeah, and we hope to see you at UFC 300, UFC 400, and UFC 500, and you keep going down that road. But, John, there was a little bit of controversy. I had to bring this up, but I don't think it was controversial to me, of a comment you made about Amanda Nunes and when she's their next child that they're going to be having. And when I heard that, I was like, that was pretty cool. Like, I'd like to know that, you know, because obviously we can tell with their daughter now, more Nina, you know, and then maybe the next one will be more Amanda. When you hear things on Twitter, people saying certain things about that, how does that affect you in the next broadcast that you're going on the comments that you're going to make regarding certain fighters? Or do you even ask them, you know, because that's a personal thing maybe for Amanda, do you ask them if it's okay for you to speak about that publicly?
Well, first, I just want to say that since Elon Musk took over on Twitter, I don't see all of my mentions anymore. So if all the masses were coming at me for that egg comment the way they were for a wayward custody battle comment back in the day, I didn't see all the venom that was out there. This time around, I qualified it. I said, I know some people get off put when I say certain things like that, but I thought it was cool that it's now Amanda Nunes' eggs who are inside Nina. And it stands to reason that the next kid, you know, might have more of that DNA strand of Amanda. Certainly, I had the permission to use that on the broadcast, and I was having a little bit of fun with it, I think, there because of some sensitivity prior, but I think it's relevant. And I'm only going, Darnell, based upon like when I'm told that information, how do I react? Right?
Yeah.
I'm just one human being. Maybe I'm an emotional guy. I'm a sensitive guy, maybe more so since I became a dad. But when I was at Amanda's gym, the Lioness Studio, and they told me that, and I saw the excitement with which they told me that. And if you really want me to break more news on the Mystic Hour, they're hoping to have 2 boys next, one with Nina's eggs and one with Amanda's, okay? I think it's pretty damn cool. So I didn't hear from my boss that maybe he thought it was too much, you know. I felt like my timing was okay. I mean, we let the moment marinate for a while, and I went to it. But, you know, I sleep pretty well at night. And, again, I'm really just trying to tell these stories as accurately and as effectively as possible. And I respect people who think that that's a detail that should have ended up on the cutting room floor. Maybe it should. I respect your opinion, but I stand by the call.
Amen. And I loved it. I keep doing it, John. Keep doing it. I just want to do a little bit word association with you, if that's okay.
Yeah, my man. What do you got?
Yeah, let's do it. So first thing you think about when you hear these names, give it to me. DC, Daniel Cormier.
Gosh, one word for that guy is pretty tough. I mean, I could say affable, but just infectious. And I don't mean like COVID, right? He enters a room and just his ability to draw people to him is unlike anything I've ever seen.
Ray Longo.
Love. I mean, that's my brother, man. Just all love for that human being.
Dominic Cruz.
Oh, my. I mean, he's out of his skull piece star now. Like, he's my best friend in the world right now. Like, might even be the best man if I got married this weekend, but he is out of his mind. I'll say dickhead.
Here's one throwback for you. Franklin McNeil.
Throwback. Legend.
Rose Namajunas.
Class. Just dripping with class. So much respect for Rose. Excited to see her at flyweight. She's all class.
Megan O'Leary.
Class is a very good word, but that's my road wife right there. That's my girl. So she's a legend, and I hope she's around as long as I am at the very least.
Paul Felder.
Iron lung. I wish he wasn't training so hard so we could hang out more on the road.
Last but not least, Kenny Florian.
Oh, too nice. That kid's too nice, Ken Flo. I want hostile Ken Flo. See, sometimes Darnell from Twitter, you get that hostile Kenny Florian on fight night. But yeah, he's Mr. Congeniality, right? I think it works well on the Anik and Florian podcast, right? I can, be sort of the yin to his yang a little bit. So.
Hey, I miss you guys together. And I hope one day at some point, maybe UFC brings him back, something like that. Because I love when you guys are together because you guys have so much chemistry. And I feel like that needs to be put back in the UFC.
Well, thank you, buddy. I appreciate it. Yeah, those were some happy days that turned into sad days when we were broken apart in 2015. But we will be live on some sort of UFC stage at the Expo at that UFC X this coming weekend for International Fight Week. So we'll be there, and we'll be excited to sort of reunite with the masses there.
Absolutely, John. John, I appreciate you so much for coming on. I remember when I met you back in 2016 at UFC International Fight Weekend, and you were just coming out of the award show. And I told him, I said, listen, one day I'm either going to be interviewing you or I'm going to be next to you, working next to you. And I still feel this way, that one day I'll be next to you and we'll be maybe doing one of these things together. But I always appreciate you for giving me the time. And I know how busy your schedule is.
My man, I appreciate you, and it's been sort of cool to watch your progress from afar, and I'll never forget that first interaction. It's crazy how long ago it was now to look back, like 7 years, almost a decade ripping off the clock. You look like you're aging just fine. I mean, can't say
I'm trying. You're aging perfectly fine, John. You got nothing to say, but I appreciate you for coming on. We'll talk soon, as we always do, and I'll see you on that TV, John.
My man, thank you so much. Talk soon, my man.
All right.